All throughout the 19th century and the early to mid-20th century, it was known that farmers, ranchers, outlaws, and many shady characters buried or hid their hoards of cash and coins for safekeeping. In many cases, even the farmers and ranchers didn't tell even their family members where it was buried or hidden. They usually intended to tell a family member where it was before they died, but sometimes they died a sudden death, so their secret became another lost treasure story. Our videos feature little-known lost treasure hoards in every state that are still waiting to be found and have a very good chance of recovery. Our lost treasure stories are from the private files of our historical researcher, who has spent over 45 years researching these types of stories, so most of them have never appeared in any online treasure hunting websites or books, so they have been unheard of for 50 to 150 years or more. We also include one lost treasure found story at the end of each video, such as the $500,000 in cash that was found under an old feed mill in 1963 after the mill owner died, or the $195,000 gold coin hoard from the 1840s that a poor farmer found as he was digging out his septic tank in 1982. Newspaper article from August 29, 1959, headline of, Dover native left buried treasure, official search for $12,000. The case of the missing $12,000, apparently buried by the father of a New Philadelphia resident, continues to puzzle sheriff's deputies in Michigan's Oakland County. A trail of several silver dollars, half dollars, and other coins was found several weeks ago, leading from a sizable hole in the ground to a road leading to the secluded, wooded, 6-acre estate formerly owned by the late Clarence W. Bair at Franklin near Detroit. Bair was the father of Clarence M. Bair of 1090 Ray Avenue Northwest, New Philadelphia. A wealthy owner of a prosperous Detroit varnish concern, the elder Bair died at the age of 75 on April 28, 1958. The elder Bair was born and reared in a home at 521 North Wooster Avenue here, and operated a grocery store and feed business in the Wentz block on the public square from 1907 to 1910. His first wife, Catherine Matthews of New Philadelphia, died in 1908. His second wife, a native of Detroit, was killed in a traffic accident in that city in 1945. The New Philadelphia Sun revealed today that his father showed him where he had buried money under flagstones at his home a number of years ago. Dad had never told me of his catch buried around the tool house on the estate, he added. Reportedly an eccentric who mistrusted banks, apparently had buried sizable amounts of silver coins in tin cans at various locations on the estate. After the trail of coins was found leading from the 7-foot-long hole near a tool shed, Bair's widow looked over her late husband's records and decoded strange letters and figures in a checkbook, which led to the finding of $3,000 in silver that had been buried in the lawn. Still more cash was found beneath a heavy slab in one of the walks. Cans in which the money was buried also contained newspapers bearing a 1940 dateline, indicating that the hoards were buried 19 years ago. According to the listing of assets in Oakland County Probate Court, Bair left only $1,150 in cash, although his National Varnish Company was estimated worth $103,000 with a net profit of $15,000 yearly, and home and furnishings valued at $60,000. Bair willed the varnish company to his wife and a son, Robert D., adding that he had otherwise provided for the son now living at New Philadelphia. Here's a side note. We don't know what the newspaper meant by the Wentz block and have no other info on where that was. It's not showing on any new or historical maps, so it may not have been a street name. It could have been a family or business name. The first place to check for that info would be the Oakland County Historical Society. This lost treasure story is from a newspaper article of May 16, 1951. The article title is, Gold Buried Long Ago Causes Talk at Mountain City. Here's the story. The question uppermost among mountain folk along the Johnson-Carter County line Tuesday is, has the Bunton money been found? Mountain legend is that William Bunton buried a pot of gold on his farm more than 150 years ago. Bunton came to the United States from his native Scotland during the American Revolution and after the war settled in what was to become Tennessee. He prospered as a farmer and trader, and the story goes that before he died, he hid his treasure in the woodland near his home in Buntontown. A grandson, U.S. Bunton, has spent most of his 83 years hunting the hidden money. One day last week, word got around among the mountain folk that Crate Blevins had found the money. Bunton, who sold his grandfather's old homestead to the Blevins family 4 years ago, went out to the farm to check on the report. Crate Blevins declined to talk about it. His father, Billy Blevins, and older brothers said there was nothing to it. Bunton wasn't convinced. So Tuesday he asked Chancellor Frank Bryant to order Crate Blevins and his relatives to turn over to Johnson County Sheriff Carl Madron any money they might have found on the old Bunton property. Bryant directed the sheriff to go to the Blevins' home and bring back the money if found. By mid-afternoon the sheriff had not returned from the isolated mountain section. Unfortunately, there is no further information found on this story, so it's anybody's guess whether the Blevins family found the money and was able to keep it quiet, or there really was nothing to the story, that the Blevins family found the money, and William Bunton's lost treasure is still right where he buried it. A lost treasure story from a newspaper article of June 20, 1903, titled, Garrett's Buried Gold. The true story of a buried treasure that has never been found. May an admirer of the household from the far western hills tell the circle of true story of a long buried treasure, now in Texas soil, placed there by 2 Georgians. Not long ago I visited the lonely spot and stood on the ground beneath which the gold is somewhere buried and saw the grave of the man who possessed it and the many excavations, some quite recent, made by those who have dug for it in vain. The story concerning it is very singular, since it shows that a strange fatality has overtaken all who were connected with the treasure. In 1850, a young man named Garrett caught the California gold fever and determined to leave his Georgia home and seek his fortune in the land of the setting sun. He was incited to this by his love for a sweet girl who had given him her heart and her promise to marry him as soon as he had made a home for her. When he went to see his sweetheart to tell her of his determination to go to the far-off goldfields, she surprised him by declaring that he must not go along. She would share with him the dangers and hardships of the enterprise, which was then fraught with much peril. She would rather do this, she said, than be left behind to endure the torture of anxiety and suspense. Her resolve was not to be shaken, and though filled with misgivings, he could but love her more for her devotion. They were married and started on their long, wearisome journey, accompanied by a young man, a cousin of the bride, whose name I do not know. The gold fields were reached at last, and work begun. The men were successful, Garrett particularly. His wife bore the hardships of the rough life bravely, but they proved too much for her, and a few years after the birth of a little son, she found the grave in the wild, strange land, and Garrett was left with only the boy to remind him of his faithful partner. Success continued to follow his mining explorations, and when in 1859 the 2 men set out to return to their home in the East, Garrett had $50,000 and his comrade had $12,000. They joined a little company of miners, who were also returning eastward to their homes. A ballot was taken as to whether the trip should be over land or by water around Cape Horn. The overland route was preferred, which was bad for Garrett, as he had that dreaded disease consumption. He was resolute and hopeful, however, and earnestly desirous of seeing his child in a civilized land and among his kindred before he left him. But when the party reached Fort Stockton, Texas, Garrett could travel no further. The company came to stop for a few days, but it was found that Garrett's condition was too serious for any hope that a short rest would restore his strength, and they pushed on, leaving him, his little boy, and his faithful friend, telling him that they would wait for him at Waco, then a small village on the Brazos. Garrett rallied, and soon after they left the fort and took the trail for Waco. When less than 200 miles from the village, Garrett was seized with a violent hemorrhage and died in the midst of the Texas hills. The young man and the little child were left alone in a spot where there was not a human habitation for many miles, and the forest was prowled over by wild beasts and savage native tribes. Good fortune brought help to the dismayed young miner in the person of a black man, a slave cowboy, who sometimes grazed his herd in this wild region. He assisted the man to dig a grave beneath 3 large live oak trees not far from the banks of the Pecan Bayou. Large rocks, plentiful around the spot, were used to curb the grave, and the body was wrapped in the skin of a beef. The black man, who still lives and remembers this sad burial, was paid for his assistance and went his way. And now the problem was, what to do with the gold? In addition to its encumbering weight, now to be borne by himself, was the risk of traveling this long, wild journey with so much treasure in his possession, the country being infested with robbers and Indians. He decided to bury most of the gold. Reserving $6,000 of his own share, he buried the rest, $56,000, at some point not very far from Garrett's grave. He made a careful plot of the exact spot, giving the distance and the direction from the grave, and then, sad at heart, and with many misgivings, he took the trail to Waco, the little orphan boy following in his footsteps. He reached Waco in safety and found that nearly all his company had gone on. A few who had waited were feverishly anxious to see home and friends. They would not consent to go back with him to get the treasure, not even for liberal pay, so he decided to take the child to his Georgia kindred and then return to get the gold. When he reached home, he found everyone in a fever of excitement. The Civil War was impending, and people could think of nothing else. Hostilities soon began, and the ex-miner enlisted and went to the field, leaving the plot of the buried treasure behind, in safe hands as he thought, and telling them that if he did not return, the money was all for the boy. He perished either in battle or by disease. The war was over, the boy grown into a man. He went to Texas and spent 3 summers searching for the treasure, but the country had been settled up. There had been many changes in the topography, and he failed to find the gold or the grave of his father. He returned home, leaving a copy of the plat with a man named Heflin, with whom he boarded and who had assisted him in the search. He married, and in 1886 he visited the New Orleans Exposition and was there caught in some machinery and killed, leaving a wife but no child. The man, Heflin, died soon after. Years passed, and the dead gold hunter's grave was undisturbed, but young Garrett had told another Texas friend about its locality, and, one day, while hunting, this man came upon the grave in a perfectly secluded place. He identified the spot by the 3 live oaks and a heap of rocks, and further by finding the grave lined with flat rocks, and in it a part of a skeleton and pieces of the skin that had wrapped it. He had, however, no directions for finding the location of the treasure, and he wrote to Mrs. Garrett asking her to send him the plat. She replied that she did not know where it was. Her husband might have had it about him when his sudden death occurred. She would search for it. Another letter to her received no answer, and a card to the postmaster brought the intelligence that she was dead. Thus all who were connected with the hidden gold sleep in the same earth in which the never-found treasure is buried. There may be remaining heirs, and if so, perhaps this story will catch their eye and lead to their searching for and finding the gold for whose sake the young Georgian and his devoted wife lost their lives. It seems, however, to carry a curse with it, which, like the epitaph over Shakespeare's grave, "Cussed be he who stirs these bones," may deter anyone from seeking to disturb its ancient resting place. This lost treasure story is from a newspaper article from 1896, and it reads, "The village of Burlington, Indiana, the erstwhile home of the dynamiter later reclaimed by 2 lady evangelists, is still hunting for hidden gold, the $20,000 in yellow coins supposed to have been secreted by Frank Hill, the wealthy miser bachelor, found dead in bed a few mornings ago. The house where he lived has been ransacked from cellar to garret, and much of the soil has been turned up in the yard in the hope of finding the hidden treasure, but so far nothing has been unearthed. It is said that in life he often spoke of the great amount of gold he had hidden away, and it is known that every dollar he got was put away by him. Money was his only thought, and to accumulate it, he worked early and late for years past." This lost treasure story begins in 1863. A man by the name of Allen Hurlbert, along with 2 friends, decided to try their hand at gold mining. The location that they chose was near the Bighorn River in Washakie County. It was a good choice, and the 3 men dug out a huge fortune. It's been stated that the 3 men took about $90,000 in raw gold in about a year. That estimate on today's gold market is over $6 million. Unfortunately, they didn't see what was in the cards for them in the near future. They decided that they were pulling out so much gold that they would keep mining right through the winter, so they built a cabin on the site. All the gold that they were taking out of that mine was buried under the cabin floor. But their camp was in Indian territory, and the Indians attacked the cabin site that winter. The Indians killed Hurlbert's 2 friends and set fire to the cabin. Somehow Hurlbert survived the attack and wandered the Wyoming wilderness for months. He was found wandering around near the Platte River miles away to the southeast of where his cabin was. Hurlbert was too scared to go back to the site to recover the gold that they had buried under the cabin floor until years later. When he finally went back in search of his fortune, he couldn't find the site where the cabin used to be. He never did find it, and it's highly unlikely anybody else did either, so all that gold, and the mine it came from, would still be there. It's possible that there are still remnants of the miners' garbage area near the cabin, as well as some burnt wood. If somebody could find that site, they could become instantly rich beyond their wildest dreams. This lost treasure story comes from a newspaper article from February 11, 1903, with the title of Pot of Gold. A pot of gold, supposed to have been buried during the Civil War, was dug up in Jessamine County Saturday. The Herald informant, obedient to the request of the finder, declined to give his name or the location of the find, as it was his purpose of search further. What had for years been a story of treasure buried by a man named Lowrie reached the ears of the man who had unearthed it. He prosecuted the search in secret, using an instrument employed in mining engineering. This instrument, it is claimed, located the treasure, which is said to be of large value. It is expected that more gold will be found in the same locality. A side note to this story is, the story could be related to a chest of gold coins that was stolen from a bank in Nicholasville, Kentucky. The story goes that the coins stolen from the bank were supposedly thrown in King's Mill Pond. They were evidently not recovered because a local fisherman found a few along the banks in 1910, but that could be a completely different story. Lowrie may have been a farmer in that area and buried the coins on his farm? Some local detective work will be needed on this lost treasure story. This lost treasure story is from a newspaper article dated November 17, 1922. The title of the article is, Talk of Buried Gold. Did Jim Whitener, alleged moonshiner, carry to his grave the secret of buried gold with him when his light was snuffed out by the crack of Bob Whiteside's pistol at Whitener's home 6 miles west of Clover last Sunday? Maybe he did and maybe he didn't. But there are those who are more or less in position to know who claimed that considerable money was buried around the house where Whitener lived. And this story, when it comes to the correspondence from a most reliable source, is unquestionable. Just a few days before Whitener was killed at the liquor party held at his home, he came to the store of a country merchant in the neighborhood. He was pretty drunk and he had a sum of money on his person. The merchant persuaded him to leave the money in the store safe. Jim talked of other money that he had at home, and the merchant persuaded him to bring some more of it to him for safekeeping. He brought it, about $457 in all. He talked of other monies that he had hidden around the place, and at different times when liquor was talking, he told stories of having much hidden gold around. When he was shot through the heart last Sunday, he died almost instantly. According to the witnesses, he merely uttered a gurgling sound when 3.32 caliber bullets punctured his body, and he carried the secret of the whereabouts of more hidden gold, if he had any, with him when he departed quickly on that journey to that land from whose bourne no traveler returns. It develops that Whitener was making a pretty fair cotton crop this year. Much of his cotton had not been ginned. His visible assets, it is estimated, is worth in the neighborhood of $2,000. There is a mortgage on the little farm that he owned, but he left the sum sufficient to pay that. When he was killed, he was already under bond in the sum of $1,000 for his appearance in Gastonia to answer the charge of operating a moonshine still. A pretty fair businessman was Jim, and he had already made arrangements to retain attorney Woltz of Gastonia to defend him in the case, and it is said that he had already paid the lawyer's fee. Although he lived hard as he died hard, and had served a chain gang sentence or two in North Carolina, according to Clover businessmen who from time to time had much dealing with him, there were much worse men than old Jim Whitener. He was considered honest, and if he contracted a debt, he would pay it, even if he had to make and sell moonshine liquor to pay. He was truthful, and he loved his friends. He had made and fooled with liquor all his life, according to some who had known him from boyhood, and he had made good liquor, if there is any such thing as good liquor. His nearest relative is a brother, Marcus Whitener, who lives in the same section in which Jim lived. Whether or not there is anything in the story of buried gold, it is a fact that there will be many in this community who will always believe so, and from time to time prowling parties will doubtless invade the Whitener place with shovel and spade searching for it. This lost treasure found story title is Stung by Crash, Farmer Buries $500,000. Herman Rabbit had been stunned once when the banks failed 40 years ago, and he was not going to let it happen again, so he buried $500,000 on his farm. The money was dug up last week by the executors of Rabbit's $2.5 million estate. Cash, paper money in $50 and $100 denominations totaling $450,000 and $50,000 in coins, was buried in 3 milk cans and an oil drum. The estate attorney James R. Miller said 4 bank clerks spent 1 full day counting the money, which was Rabbit's hedge against another bank crash. Miller said Rabbit, 81, a bachelor who died October 10th, was a man from another era. He amassed the fortune selling his farm property to suburban developers, but wore overalls and drove around in an old pickup truck. Rabbit had no immediate family and left his estate to the children of a half-brother, a housekeeper, and a relative who helped him run the farm. Executors who were selling Rabbit's estate found a locked box containing a note directing them to his farm area. The oil drum, which contained the 50-cent pieces in silver dollars, was so heavy that some of the coins had to be scooped out so it could be carried. The Rockville Mail branch of the Maryland National Bank did not have room in its vaults for the huge hoard, and some of the coins had to be taken to a second bank.